is Steve Marinucci, and I am here with the author of this book. It's called Imagining All the People, the author, Marcus Benjamin Ray Bradley. And we're going to talk about his book, which is a very unique kind of book. You'll hear all about it. Marcus, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Your book is really unique. What you've basically done, you basically made real life characters out of all the characters in the songs the Beatles have done. Is that correct?
That's correct. I became intrigued about the characters and write poetry as it is, and I decided to look at maybe some of the backstories of these characters, like Sergeant Pepper or Maxwell or Jude. What were they thinking from their point of view? Oftentimes they're a third party in the song. Sometimes they're the narrator of the song. And I really spent a lot of time with the lyrics and with various notes about the lyrics, the stories behind the songs, just to get a little context about what was going on back then and how did Paul come up with Eleanor Rigby. So really let my imagination wander about what those characters might have been thinking, feeling, or what led them to that point that they were in the song.
Marcus, what's your poetry background in terms of how much have you done outside of this, and what other kind of poetry have you done, if any, different?
I took a poetry class in college in 2013, I believe, and really fell in love with it and started writing poetry, not about the Beatles, about family experiences, ideas. And I've gotten 40 or more published in magazines, reviews, journals around the country, and even a couple in Australia somehow. Those gave me some ideas about a book. I would love to have a book of non-Beatles poetry. What I learned in that class is about persona poems, which is what these kind of are, as taking the point of view of the character. I really wanted to do that and tried to think about a theme. What would hold my interest for that long to write 30, 40, 50 poems about a particular thing? And several years later, I got this idea for the Beatles characters. I've been a Beatles fan since I was a teenager and have listened to them ever since as a huge fan. I started with Maxwell just to see if it made any sense. And I thought that one came together well and went from there. But yeah, this is my first book of poetry. Others have been in magazine or, as I mentioned, journals, reviews, anthologies, that sort of thing.
So you were a poet and you decided to do this. Obviously, you had to figure out how Lennon and McCartney came up with the characters. What was your initial feeling on how they came up with characters? Was it storytelling, or do you think there were motivations behind each of the characters?
Most of what's in this book, it's either storytelling from their point of view or most prominently about that character. But other times, you'll notice in the book, I have very minor characters, their points of view. For example, the nurse in Penny Lane. She's mentioned in one line, the book. Other poems are completely about the character, like Maxwell or Sadie or Prudence. And then there are those that basically have no context whatsoever about Semolina Pilchard. So I got a variety of information about characters, some lots, some very little, and got to speculate and really get creative on what direction to take the poem in. And you'll notice that the poems are not about the Beatles at all. So we could take it in any direction I wanted to. Eleanor Rigby's poem, it's about, in a way, mental wellness. Maxwell is a psycho killer. So we can take those in any direction we desire. And I got a lot of thoughts into these poems that were my own, right? That weren't mentioned in the songs, the lyrics, or any of the interviews necessarily.
Because one of the things I was thinking about when I read the book was, were the characters, were the inspirations unique to you, or can other people find different interpretations in what you've written? Does that make sense?
Sure.
Are they hard and fast, or is everything open to interpretation?
Definitely open. I included a section at the end of the book about questions you might ask, or a reading group might ask, or a professor might ask students if they were to read this book. Basically prompts for discussion One of my favorites is very general. I mentioned Eleanor earlier. It was a basic question of what are some reasons why Eleanor might be lonely? And you could take that in any direction you would like based on the year that we presume it was set in and her circumstances around the church and picking up rice and so on. We can speculate any number of reasons why she might be acting that way.
So, what do the characters do for the songs themselves? How do, when people see these inspirations, do you think that they make the songs? I don't want to say make the songs better, but they add more to the songs. Do you think?
They certainly did for me, thinking it that in depth about these lyrics. The Beatles fans, they know these songs by heart. They've known the words for many years, maybe not have thought about the characters much more than the melody and the music. So it's really an exploration of different angles in which we can think about these characters. I've heard some feedback for some people that said it made me listen more closely to the lyrics. It's given me another way to think about the song that I've listened to for decades.
Probably one of the closest things to a fully developed character, and by that I mean your your imaginings of the characters, or some are more developed than others. But one that I found was really well developed or fully developed was Rocky Raccoon. And if you would do me a favor and read that now, can you read that for me? And I'll ask you a question at the end.
Yeah, that sounds great. The character in this one is not Rocky himself, but instead the doctor that came in seeking of Jan after the shootout at the hoedown. So let me. So the way we set this up is each poem about a character has a page preceding the poem that discusses the character. I call them the synopsis of the character. Having read the lyrics and about them, hopefully that synopsis of the character informs the poem, provides maybe even more background information. And this one is about the doctor. The synopsis goes like this. Back in the Wild West days of saloons and hoedowns, a love triangle erupts in gunfire when the jealous, jilted lover draws on the new man in the girl's life. The town doctor is summoned, but alas, the doc is drunk and can't do much more than give a grim assessment of the wound as fatal. Whether due to his natural sense of optimism, denial, or the doc's inebriated condition, the wounded cowboy disregards the prognosis and heads back to his room above the saloon. Unbeknownst to all, the previous guest had left behind his Bible, which offered unexpected comfort. And the name of this poem, Point of View of the Doctor, is called Ginned Up Condition. I encountered the patient while attending a hoedown, where dancing was square and the mason jars round. Mine happened to be repeatedly filled with delectable gin, a family recipe carefully crafted in someone's bath. A skirmish between rival suitors took a hostile turn and escalated to the point where arms were presented. The urgent matter at hand was abruptly settled when one was discharged with some accuracy. Being the only medical professional on the premises, I was called to the room where he lay bleeding. I diagnosed from my point of vantage atop the table that he had indeed suffered a penetrating injury. The cavity made as the bullet passed through the tissue was as round as a juniper berry steeping in spirits. I had difficulty determining the exact quantity of holes there were for us to be concerned about. I was seeing anywhere from 1 to 3 of them as a direct result of my impaired ability to focus. The patient flatly rejected my recommendation of embarking on immediate exploratory surgery. Having no one else qualified to give a second opinion, I fell back on my Hippocratic oath to do no harm. I knew that by telling him the wound was fatal, that I would not be underestimating its severity. The incident may have turned him to other treatments, perhaps Dr. Quack's exotic tonic or Rocky's newly found faith. However, I have digressed from the intent of this note. Rocky is to be excused from work for the rest of the week.
Now, one thing, these are poems, but they do not rhyme. And I know that there are modes of poetry that are free form. Is that how you describe what you're doing here, or how do you describe it as a
Sure, I prefer free verse as opposed to rhyme schemes and limericks and so on. I find, and this is my non-Beatles poetry as well, is in this form. I find it constraining to feel like you have to rhyme with the last word of the previous one. It's much freer to take your idea different places without that requirement. I think that could change the line for the sake of rhyming, which I did not, or I have no interest in doing. I do, however, like to structure the lines so that they, if you look at most of the poems, the lines kind of line up evenly. They're the same length, not the same number of syllables, but as you read it aloud, there's a cadence to it. There are breaks in stanzas to create thoughts as we go through the progression through the story, or in this case, an incident. So I didn't like that particular parameter of having to rhyme. I just don't find it as fun to read and certainly not as fun to write. So this isn't, as we mentioned earlier, kind of rhyming poetry or about the Beatles. Now there's lots of information about the Beatles, but those are in footnotes to help kind of give some context to some of the words or phrases in the poem that might reference something the Beatles had done back then.
when you say free verse, it's basically just wherever you want to take it, correct?
A
You
little
don't do it.
different than prose poetry, which really does read like a short story. These do have structure, and I've rewritten so many of these lines to get the length right and the ideas spread throughout the poem.
And you don't use rhythm in your poetry. In other words, there's no, maybe I'm thinking a little too, I'm thinking back to in school when we had to read poetry. There were some poets, I believe, that had rhythm in their verses. That is not something you're doing here.
Correct. There's things like limericks and sonnets. I found sonnets very difficult to write because of the number of syllables and the rhyme scheme. And again, I'll use the word constraining on what words you need to use in that second line, right? Again, I tried to pace it so that reading aloud, which I've done many times as I edited, to make sure it has a certain flow to it.
Now, that really makes this more than just what it seems. From the when you open it first and when you look at it, it's what are these words, what are these characters? But to hear that, to hear how you imagined it and how you structured it, it's really quite complicated. It's not really simple. And that's really unique about this thing, that it's more than just a fan thing. Actually, it's probably not the way to put it, but it really is more than a fan thing. There's actually a lot of thought that went into how you set it up and what you did. And I think, and that's really interesting. I just realizing now how to take it to that point is just pretty wild. So
There were lots of failed attempts at directions to take these in. You
how,
know,
what, in what way?
there has to be something, I guess not a point, but there has to be something in the poem worth expressing. This one was humorous. There are a few humorous ones in there. Some are very moving, some are matter of fact, but there has to be some essence there. I'll use the like Lady Madonna, for example. I really tried probably 3 different ways to write that, and you'll notice it's not in the book. There wasn't anything that really caught on and got traction several lines in that I wanted to take it in that direction or this direction. I didn't want to just talk about, in that case, someone with many children that was trying to pay bills and they ran around all day. That would just be restating what is in the song. So there had to be I think of it as an angle. There has to be an angle into the character to get to a point of the poem.
Now, on the opposite side, so to speak, where you made up a story about Rocky Raccoon, everybody knows that Hey Jude is about Julian Lennon, but you have a story there. You developed a Jude character there. Where did that come from? How did you get to that?
Again, yes, you're right. We know it's about Julian and his situation at the time, but reading the lyrics, you wouldn't know that. And I have friends that didn't know that and were surprised that it was about Jude. But just reading the lyrics, go out and get her, let it out, let it in. Someone struggling to come to terms with, I guess, love. And I took it in a direction almost a young man wanting to express love to a female. So the lyrics, if you look at it from that direction, the lyrics don't necessarily contradict that idea. We just happen to know the backstory, why he wrote it and what he was thinking.
Okay, so you actually made Hey Jude more of a romantic poem than it actually was. Interesting. Very interesting. Who did the illustrations?
The illustrations are by Carrie Heimlich from Ohio.
You know, I'm going to show the book here. You can't, let me see if I can get in close enough to where you can see the illustrations on the front cover. But that's basically the way the illustrations look in the book. I thought those were quite interesting too.
They are wonderful. They really make the book a more complete work of art, really. We've got pictures of interpretations of what the characters might look like, drawn by an artist that had some experience with animal drawings. So the first one she drew was Henry the horse, because she likes to do horses and dogs and animals. And when we got Henry the horse in, we knew that she was going to do the rest of them. And we left the faces featureless, except for maybe glasses or a feather in the hat or whatever. On purpose, we left those features off because the idea was the poem would fill in the character as you read through it. So we had 27 original drawings done for this. The reason it's 27 and not 30, because Vera, Chuck, Dave, and Granddad are all in the same collage before the When I'm 64 poems.
Okay.
So Carrie also, the reason I knew that she did animal drawings is she's my sister-in-law. And when I asked her for a favor to do the animals, which consisted of Henry and Martha, she turned those in and blew our minds with how wonderful the line drawings were. Now, I must say that Carrie isn't necessarily a Beatles fan. So we had to, this would be Melissa Davis and I, send her notes on what each character we think he should look like. And I just pulled it up before this podcast. We sent her 16 pages of notes with various screenshots. I'm looking at Honey Pie. We sent her ideas about her looking like a flapper and having a feather in her hat. And we sent notes about Her Majesty and said, just use the exact picture from the pound. Everybody's going to recognize that. So lots and lots of ideas. Sexy Sadie, we sent pictures of who was sexy back then at the time. So we sent her Sophia Loren, Anita Ekberg, and said, that's what was sexy in 1967, 8. So lots and lots of fun with creating the drawings, and we received them in one at a time and just were happy with each one. Very few edits along the way for this book. On the pictures, and the pictures, as Steve just showed, are used in a big collage on the front and back covers. They're also in the book preceding the poem. That character is
right. The individual. What I just showed on the cover is a conglomeration of all the characters shown individually through the book.
In poetry, a very short book of poetry is called a chapbook, and they're almost like stapled together. Just very, I guess, I wouldn't say minor. It's not anything elaborate to present, and maybe sold for $1 or $2 or given away to get your work out there. I had written maybe 75% of what turned out to be the book, and I sent it to a couple of poetry publishers. And then I turned that on its head, that whole idea, because I think I counted 28 Beatles books in my bookcase earlier this week. So what I realized, or what I know, is there are publishers that really like publishing Beatles stuff. So I thought there would probably be less poetry people that were really into the Beatles than there were Beatles people who might want to consider reading poetry. So once I made that switch in publishers I was pursuing, I emailed Melissa Davis at the Beatle Works Ltd.
She is the publisher, correct?
Yes,
Yeah, just
we
so
did
we
have a press that did the printing, but she didn't worked with me for over a year to get this thing ready. She responded pretty quickly to that email, just introducing the idea. And then I sent her what I had written so far in an email. If you don't know Melissa, she was the first ever cohort to graduate the University of Liverpool's MA in basically the Beatles' impact to culture.
I'm not sure I knew that. I've known Melissa for several years. I knew her for previous books that she had worked on, but I'm not sure. I don't remember if she told me that or not. But okay, interesting. Melissa Flo. So sorry you couldn't be here. Go ahead.
No, she, after graduation or maybe leading up to it for many years, put together what's called the Beatles Bibliography. And it's a catalog of basically as much as she could find, everything that's been written about the Beatles since the early 60s. When she told me this, I was prepared to accept her opinion. She said, I don't think a book like this in the last 60 years has ever been done. So that gave me great motivation to flesh this out more and get the artwork and get the footnotes and write some more poems to make it the complete book as opposed to a chapbook.
And Beneath the Waves, which is about Yellow Submarine, you talk about why the sub isn't yellow, which I thought was amazing. Why was the sub made yellow in the first place, according to your interpretation?
In the poem, it does mention that submarines are typically gray, so they're a bit camouflaged in the distance at dawn and dusk and so on. This was just basically a vivid color of yellow and very celebratory for what the people wanted to live on a submarine for. Had all their friends there. It was kind of like a little commune of folks that gathered and went out to sea. They weren't hiding anything. They were spreading peace and love.
In another poem that caught my attention was Your Majesty, where you said, but he thinks she's a pretty nice girl and intends to win her affection one day, admitting that he's going to need a bellyful of wine to work up the courage to confess his love to her. My question is, does he realistically have a chance?
Absolutely not. I've read that when the queen takes, for example, a drink of wine, everyone does in turn. When she's finished eating, their plates are taken away. So you're very much following her lead. And whether this guy didn't normally drink much or just happened to drink too much, he was escorted out, which can't be a good thing. And as he's heading home, hopefully by foot, he thinks he fell in love as well as getting intoxication.
Explain another character based on a real person is Dear Prudence. Explain how you came up with that characterization.
I certainly knew the story of their trip to India and transcendental meditation, and that it wasn't just them. This Prudence was in particular Mia Farrow's sister, who really took this seriously. I'm sure they all did. They went to India and practiced this. But the story of Dear Prudence, she became obsessed with meditation and wanted to find enlightenment, and rarely, at some point, wouldn't really leave the room she was meditating in. They invited her to come out and play. They were trying to drag her out of her meditation because I wouldn't say she was overdoing it. I don't know, but she really became obsessed with it. So that poem is from her point of view about why she doesn't want to.
How do you characterize her feelings?
She's trying to find meaning, something that she thinks will benefit her for the rest of her life. She says, I didn't come here to play with you boys. I'm here to find meaning. It was her just doubling down on the reason why she went, just taking it very seriously. The Beatles were out playing music, socializing, but she locked herself down for some serious meditation to the point that it concerned some of the others in the group.
I'm really impressed by the way this whole thing was put together and what you did here. It's quite impressive. Pick out one more and read it, and then we can talk about it.
Okay, sure. One that I think is one of the stronger poems is about Father Mackenzie from the song Eleanor Rigby. And we know that, and as far as the synopsis leading up to the poem, Father Mackenzie is a vicar at a church where the parishioners, for whatever reason, no longer attend, whether for regular Sunday services or funerals. Resigned, he carries on performing his duties religiously. This poem is called Redeemer. One must have a deep understanding of the rules to tell others how to live, at least while we're here. The title of vicar in the Church of England is only awarded after much studying and training, and comes with it many roles and responsibilities. My services are open to any and all visitors. I'm always ready to welcome a new believer. But my church-going flock have all vanished, like so many artifacts mentioned in the Bible, to the point that I worry about humankind. Some, no doubt, wonder why I carry on, dutifully crafting sermons, soliloquies, singing hymns that find no ears to reach, continuing the call I committed to live for, with the church as empty as Christ's tomb. If someone asks why I persist, I would quell their concerns thusly. It is simply because I would know that I was not devoting myself fully to our Father who art in heaven. I believe it a sin to crave worldly respect, so I must be both patient and humble. Mother Teresa said that the only way to learn humility is by being humiliated. I thank the Lord for teaching it so well.
Now, how long did it take to put this book together?
I started writing Maxwell's Silver Hammer in 2019. Just the first one, not thinking it would turn into all of this. And it was just for fun. And I wrote very slowly at first, just very carefully, lots and lots of edits. And after that, I think it was Sexy Sadie and then maybe Mean Mr. Mustard, and just slowly started accumulating these. When I got, and it turns out, to the 75% point, I sent it to Melissa Davis. That would have been in November of 23. I had sent her 23 poems, and when she expressed interest, I wrote the last 7. And then we started fleshing it out with, so November 23 sent to Melissa. I think we signed an agreement a few months later. And then we decided to do the drawings. So we engaged Carrie Heimlich in spring of 24. So we're already a few years in, right? We took our time with the artwork. That really took the entire summer of 24. And then we needed to get some services like graphic design to do the cover, the compositing for the book formatting. Melissa really taught me how to publish a book. I had no idea. Never done it before, but I had these poems together. And just the process took a long time to get it just the way we wanted it, with all the pieces, the drawings, the synopsis, the poems, where we edited those. Then the fun parts to me were the about the author and the introduction, coming up with the prompts for discussion, things like that, to really build out the book in full. So to answer your question, it took a few years to write and a couple of years to get published or to get it ready for publishing. I got my first copies in September of 25.
I'll show it up here. This does not have a dust cover. It's a hardcover, and it makes it look really nice.
I never care for book covers. They come off, and that is just our preference. And I agree. I think it came out the way we wanted. A very nice hardcover. We also have paperbacks and ebook.
And you've got some words on the back by Ken Womack. So that's cool. Where can people get this?
It's available on their bookstore. It's bookbaby.com. That's the most direct way. It is on Amazon. That might take a little longer depending on if it's in stock in their warehouse, but I have sold many on Amazon. So it's available in lots and lots of booksellers. BookBaby works closely with tons of companies like Amazon and Barnes and Noble and so on. The hardcover is $20 or so. The paperback's $15 or so. The ebook is very inexpensive, $2.99, because it doesn't cost anything to distribute. And as a first-time author, I wanted to get it in the hands of as many people as possible.
Are you going to do a sequel? Or have you got any other plans?
I am, in fact, doing a sequel. It's going to be much longer as far as the number of poems. I'm on the fence about how to use the artwork. The second book won't be as easy, I guess, to imagine what drawings would fit. For Credence, for example, we've got someone meditating. For Mother Nature's Son, we have someone playing guitar in a field. Those are easy enough to come up with. But in the second book, I really took a different approach as opposed to named characters, just using basically the narrator of the song as a character. For example, one of the first ones I wrote was when I saw her standing there. It's from the point of view of the girl who doesn't have a name in the song, but she's at a dance and meets a guy, and it's about her point of view in the song. We don't have any clue as to what that character was like, just that the boy or the man fell in love. With that different approach, the artwork will be different. I'm not quite sure how yet. I can say that the first draft of the poems are all written, but as I learned with this book, that is half the battle, because we need all these other services, designers and artists and footnotes and synopsis. Hopefully we get quicker at getting our product ready for print than last time. I think we learned so much this time around that it will be.
It sounds like you don't have a firm date on when it's going to be out.
No, not at all. In fact, we've only started discussing the poems themselves. So once we get past that hurdle, we'll start building on the other pieces.
Okay.
I would hope it would be this year or next. I don't expect it to be as long as this one. We had a team.
You mean take as long?
Take as long. Yeah,
right.
The book will be hopefully longer, but we did have to assemble a team of people. There were other people. We had a round of beta readers. That takes time to get some feedback. Melissa would send, not the book, but maybe 4 or 5 hand-picked ones for Ken Womack, for example. You mentioned him earlier. She knew that Eleanor Rigby was one of his favorite songs, so she sent him that and some others that, because she knew him, ones that he might respond to. And one of my favorite stories on the beta readers is, we thank her in the acknowledgments, Angela Ballard. She's a retired British chartered librarian, and Melissa got to know her when she was in Liverpool in the program, the master's program. She was a beta reader, and I think at the time, the book, the file name was just called like Beatles People or something like that. And she said, I think the poems are great. I think the title does not live up to the poems. And she suggested Imagine All the People, which is such a great title. We tweaked it somewhat. We tweaked it somewhat into Imagining All the People. So we got some good feedback from people to incorporate, and really, again, I'll say I didn't know how to publish a book. So I've learned you need this help from people that specialize in those areas. And all that takes time to onboard and hone what it is you're looking for. There were iterations on all of those things that I mentioned. It is quite the process.
Are you going to call it Imagining All the People too, or are you going to do a different name for it?
I'm leaning towards a volume two. Yeah,
Volume two.
imagining all the people. Same concept, just a different take on it, using again non-named characters and more just maybe more loosely associated with the song. Whereas these were tied as much as I could to the lyrics of what's known about them. In book two, I speculate on many more things than just what we know as fans from the lyrics and the analysis and all the books and all the web pages.
As I said in the beginning, this is a really unique project, and it really takes you to places that you probably didn't expect Beatles songs to go. And I congratulate you on the concept and on getting it done. And I wish you luck with volume two. I wish you luck with this one. Thank you, Marcus, for coming on and talking about your book.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm learning that there's a whole community of people like yourself that write books, that do podcasts, that do radio shows, that go to every Beatles fest. So it's been quite fun learning about this community of Beatles of super fans that watch a podcast like this and the YouTube channel specifically about the Beatles. So it's an honor to be a part of.
Thanks again, Marcus. And I'm gonna, as usual, fumble around with the stop button and find it and stop it. So here we go. Thank you again. And
Thank you.
folks, hang on. There's more to come. Okay, and here's our review of Paul McCartney and Wings, the story of a band on the run. Paul McCartney's really on a current kick to tell the Wings story with two projects in the works. One, a book is already out, Paul McCartney and Wings, the story of a band on the run, edited by Ted Widmer. And then there's the video documentary Man on the Run that covers much the same territory. That's directed by Morgan Neville, that will be out at the end of February on Amazon Prime. Interestingly, according to the introduction in the hardback, Ted Widmer was not given the Man on the Run film to view, so the two projects are entirely separate. But anyway, Paul McCartney and Wings, the story of a band on the run, available in hardback, ebook, and audio versions, is a warts and all oral history that goes deep into the history of the band through quotations from Paul McCartney, Linda McCartney, daughters Mary and Stella, Wings band members Ringo Starr, Yoko Ono, and Sean Lennon, friends and associates, and a myriad of Wings fans. The quotes bring together a look at the band that's far from a whitewash but takes readers through the band's good times and bad. For example, the band's early surprise gigs are discussed in depth with stories from many of them presented through quotes of those who were involved presenting them. Linda's early nervousness at being a band member and how she gained more confidence as time went on is also discussed. And then there's this quote from Paul about the fashion sense of the band. Looking back, I must say it's very interesting to see some of the clothes we decided to wear. Now these things are coming back. The haircuts might come back. It was the times. Linda loved Bowie, so she got a Bowie-esque haircut. To which Stella, who these days knows a little about fashions herself, comments, she was like self-styled and it was the coolest effing look on earth. It was so ahead of its time. In the last quote in the book, Aubrey Poe Powell is quoted about what he did to get the statue for the cover of Wings' Greatest Hits, but it's something that can be applied to Paul and his career with Wings. I appreciate him, Paul, the fact that he was prepared to take risks and do things and not be indiscernible and penny pinching. He wanted it done for real. We recommend this book highly. I think it's a great look at the history of Wings, and it doesn't just go over things very quickly. It really goes in deep. And we recommend getting both the hardcover and the audiobook if you can, because the audiobook has a 20-minute reading of the foreword by Paul McCartney that was written for the hardback. Two other real voices in the audiobook are Mary and Stella McCartney. The rest are read by actors, including Paul's quotes after the foreword, so that Paul is not heard again after the foreword. But it's a great book, and we really recommend it. It was announced January 27th that the North American theatrical release of Billy Preston, That's the Way God Planned It, a feature-length documentary about Billy's life, will take place February 20th in New York City. One of the executive producers is Olivia Harrison. This is going to go through his entire life from his early days when he was 16 years old playing with Little Richard through his work with the Beatles and many others. The documentary follows the extraordinary life and six-decade career of Billy Preston, whose signature sound shaped the work of the Beatles, Ray Charles, Mahalia Jackson, Aretha Franklin, the Rolling Stones, Barbra Streisand, Sly Stone, Eric Clapton, and many others. And as I said, Olivia Harrison is one of the executive producers. I am looking forward to seeing this film in the theater, and you should be too. This is going to be a great movie. And just to add, there's the movie poster for this film, and that looks really cool. We have a late Beatles News Briefs for you. Paul McCartney announced that the Man on the Run documentary will be in theaters one day only on February 19th. They'll announce what theaters and what times on February 4th at 2 p.m. GMT, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, and 6 a.m. Pacific Time. The film starts running on Amazon Prime on February 27th, but you can see it in theaters one day only. The theatrical showing will include a special conversation between Paul McCartney and director Morgan Neville. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. You can hear our complete list of shows at marinucci.podbean.com in audio and in video and audio at youtube.com. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. We would love to have you, and you'd find out about the shows as soon as they're published. Again, thanks for supporting us, and take care, everybody, and until next time, we'll be seeing you.